Okay, so about 15 years ago, I was trucking through the airport in Denver, Colorado, and I like to walk fast, and I don't take the little escalator things, and because I'm a fast walker, and I do. So I'm trucking through the airport, and I see this lady with this. I'm walking up on a lady with a real gaudy sweater with horses all over it, and I truck on by, and I say, "Nice sweater, ma'am." And as I looked, I said, "Oh, you're Temple Grandin." And so that was my first meeting with Temple. And so I think it might be the same shirt she's wearing today, by golly. I always tell that joke. Nobody thinks it's funny, but I really think it's funny. It's not true, but it's funny. So we started visiting, and she spent about a half an hour visiting with me. And I was really into the cattle handling and the horsemanship at that time. And so I was thinking about what good can I do here today? So the one thing that I remember Temple telling me that day, we talked about a lot of things. She told me about making change, people making a change. And she used the example of a butcher knife that she does a lot of work in the slaughterhouses to increase animal welfare, but also human welfare. And she talked about this new knife they had designed that was ergonomically correct. And it was shaped different than the old straight-handled butcher knife you have at home probably. And it had a handle that's shaped for the arm, so the arm would not get fatigued and you wouldn't get as many injuries and carpal tunnel and all those things. She told me if people had just started working there, I don't remember if it was 2 weeks or a month or whatever below, then they would take that knife and they would increase productivity, and it would go on, and they were better, safer, everything was great. If they'd only been there for a few weeks. If they'd been there more than 2 weeks or a month, they had their habits already established in their brain. They would use it for a few days, put it back in the drawer, and then take it out and take their old one out and not be as productive. That's really what this conference is all about, and that's what Temple's all about. So what you learn here today, that's what I learned from Temple. Don't let the things stuck in your mind hold you back. So then we've done a lot of things together, and it's just really nice that this picture here, I'm real proud that we were doing a video for the Cattlemen's Association, and my wife and I had our horses there in Temple, and I got horseback and gathered some cattle. That was really, is that the last time you've been a horseback? Yeah. But so I'm just a hick cowboy, but here's what I'm finding. A lot of the stuff that my grandfather taught me and the things I learned by thinking and not just using the old style knife, but using the new things, that a lot of things that I'm finding out just from common sense, science backs it up. And Temple has showed me so many things in the cattle world that I kind of knew, but she proved it with science. So I kind of try to use a lot of science too. And after we got the cattle through the gate here, and somebody took our picture, and then we took the cattle in, we got a foot. And I was talking all this big explanations about scientific things of why you should do things a certain way. And I would just put some cattle through a gate, and we were on camera. It's on video. It's a great video. And I have this big, long explanation, and Temple simply says, in other words, if the cattle go through the gate, it's a good thing. If they don't, it's a bad thing. Duh. So there's science and common sense, and that's what it takes, I think, in this world to become a great horseman. So please, Temple Grandin.
And I don't have the slide changer. I'm going to need that. Someone bring the slide changer down to me. It's really great to be here today. What I've tried to do, and a lot of the work I've done, is kind of cross the divide between, the practical world and science. And I've learned a lot from Kurt. And one of the discussions we had last night is whether horses actually think. Well, one of the things that Kurt talked about in his cattle handling demonstration in Montrose that I was at just recently is you don't want the calf to just react when you're trying to get through the gate. Give it time to think. Now, it depends on how you define thinking, but animals have an orienting response. You've all seen a deer go like this and look. Okay, when the deer goes like that and looks, then the brain makes a decision. Do I just run off, kind of have a fear response, or do I keep looking? You know, that's thinking at a very basic level. That's called an orienting response. Deer do that all the time. Now, we got to start worrying about animal stress. I know this is a dog here, but there's a lot of things that go across a lot of species, and there's a lot of young dogs now that are turning gray prematurely because they're locked up at home and they're having a miserable life. They don't get to do enough stuff. All right, we got a horse there definitely in a bad situation with the saddle falling off. That picture was not photoshopped. I just took it maybe at the wrong time or at the right time. Now, this brings up the whole thing of sudden novelty. Sudden novelty can be really stressful. You know, people are always asking me, well, my horse behaved fine at home and he went crazy at the show. Well, you got a lot of new things at the show that are not at home. Flags, bikes, and balloons. And I call them the big three. Recently, I went to a racehorse auction, and people were saying, oh, I take my horse out to the track, he's fine. But then the day of the race, you got loudspeakers, you got noise, you've got the crowds. It's not the same as when the crowds are not there. Now, a real basic principle is a calm animal is much easier to handle. If an animal gets really upset, any animal, it doesn't matter what it is, it takes 20 to 30 minutes to calm back down. If the horse has really gone berserk, sort of imagine, you know, a lot of us have been in a near car accident. And I had a near car accident when a 2x6 came off a trailer, and I managed to avoid it. And a switch flipped and swearing and everything else came out, and it took 20 minutes to get over that. Yeah, you don't want to let an animal get to that point. Now, I was looking at read the speaker's book that's going to be talking about the neurology, about, you know, animal being calm. There was a lot of really good stuff in there about the horse's jaw. There's a cattle with brown eyes. The whites of the eyes are showing. They're really fearful. Horses will switch their tail. It's kind of an early warning sign before he does something like bucking. Cattle do the same thing. Pooping. I saw racehorses going into an auction that were perfectly calm at the stable, having people look at them, got them up there with the loudspeakers, and you had fancy, expensive, you know, $500,000 horses, and they're making cow pies rather than road apples because they're stressed out. People hadn't thought about the sound. They hadn't been trained to tolerating loudspeakers. It was scaring the you-know-what out of them. Mr. Bison puts his tail up. He's really stressed out. When a goat puts its tail up, it's happy. There are species differences. And there's a really stressed out dog right there. Animals will oftentimes associate something bad that happened to them with something they were seeing or hearing right when it happened. Maybe the place where it happened. That's what they'll do. Watch what the ears are doing. You're going to be hearing more about that. Animals watch things with their ears. One of the things I want to do is to get you to be more observant. Be a whole lot more observant. In some of my talks, I've had a picture of eclipse shadows. And those eclipse shadows were on the sidewalk right next to our library, and I watched people just walk over that. Students walking over it. They didn't see it. See, an animal lives in a sensory-based world. Get away from language. You got to get out of the world of language. It's a world of pictures, a world of sounds. Animals communicate with tone of voice, touch sensations. It's not a word-based world. And I get asked all the time, how did autism help me understand animals? All my thoughts are like movies in my head. That's shown very, very well in the HBO movie. And some of the people that are really, really good at training horses and other animals, oh, they're dyslexic, they're ADHD, or they may be a little bit on the autism spectrum. See, now we're getting into my other world. I'm seeing too many kids addicted to video games right now, and they don't get introduced to things like horses, that there's a whole other world out there Whole lot better than video games. The other thing I've learned about careers, students get interested in stuff they get exposed to. I was an Easterner with no background in agriculture. I got exposed to beef cattle when I was 15 years old at my aunt's ranch, and that is how I got interested in them. We got to get these kids out doing stuff. The reason why I was late to coming to the trade show is I was talking to a mom in the restaurant, ADHD kid. I said, you got to get this kid out doing stuff, and you better be controlling the video game playing. Well, that's an example of some really bad white eye right there. Now, you get animals really, really fearful, you're going to start having their physiology get really out of whack. I show this to lab animal people. You just force animals to do stuff, your lactate and glucoses are going to just be off the chart. You're not going to get any normal values. It's hard lots of times for people to admit that what they're doing with an animal is just stressing the you-know-what out of it. Do animals have emotions? Yes, on a primitive level, they definitely do. Prozac works on dogs. Animal research is used to test antidepressants. They have a rather nasty test for that. You give a rat some Prozac, and if it's working, he'll swim longer before he gives up, and you take the rat out before it drowns. That's an old test that was used to test antidepressants. The brain systems are very, very similar. Now, I really like the Jack Penskep core emotional systems. Jack Penskep core emotional systems. I really, really like this. There's 7 of them. And these are verified in science with old experiments where they'd stimulate different parts of the brain. And you have fear. You know, your horse goes berserk at the show. That's due to fear. Or rage, anger. Why do animals have anger? Fight off a predator. Then you have separation anxiety. I don't like Jack's original word, panic, because that gets mixed up with fear. I'd rather call that separation distress. You take the colt away from the mare and they're both whinnying. Yes, I watched $500,000 horse whinny at the thoroughbred auction because it hadn't been trained to tolerate a strange steward holding it. And when the lead was passed over, big, high-pitched whinnies. I watched 3 in a row, super expensive horses do that. And I'm going, I've never even been to a thoroughbred auction before. Why am I seeing this? Well, I think some of it has to do with visual thinking. It was pretty obvious to me. Then you have seeking. Okay, you want to train your horse to tolerate the flags? Why don't you decorate the pasture with flags and let your animal voluntarily approach the flags? Novelty is attractive when the animal can voluntarily approach. It's scary when you shove it in their face. And shoving flags in their face is not the way to do it. And then you have sex. Then you have mother-young nurturing, licking. There's also some maternal defense there, and play. Now, back there, the tech people have got a music mixing board. And you can look at that music mixing board, and it's got a series of volume controls that you can slide up and down. Now, genetics will kind of set it at different settings. And then the horse's experience also affects things. If you have a horse that's fairly high fear and you abuse it, that's the horse that's going to be a rescue that's got a whole lot of problems. Now, I know some people are interested in clicker training. You know where I think that really is going to work? For abused horses, some of these rescues. I had a lady call me up about 3 weeks ago that she got a rescue that she couldn't touch, she couldn't do anything with it, totally unknown handling history, and I suggested clicker training, like in my book, Animals Make Us Human, where she, trained it, click was associated with Ward. She is now picking up the feet and leading it around with a halter. She couldn't get near it before. You see, one of the big problems with a lot of training methods is people get way too single-track minded. They'll say, well, we'll use clicker training for everything. I don't know if you're going to use it for everything, but for abused horses and these rescues that seem to really work. She hasn't ridden it yet, but she had a horse she couldn't even touch when she started, and she called me up. She goes, well, I don't know what I'm going to do about this. But I really like the Jack Penskep emotional systems, and they're fully explained in my book, Animals Make Us Human. Now, on the music mixing board, let's look at cattle, and it doesn't really matter what species it is, but you can have high fear or low fear cows. And you used to just measure this by how fast they come out of the squeeze chute or how much they fight a squeeze chute. Well, it turns out how fast they come out, that's fear. But now that we've been selecting for calmer and calmer cattle, now you get what I call a snorter. It's just kind of pissed that you put it in a squeeze chute. That's starting to measure anger, and they know how to blow snot on you too, and they got no flight zone. And then you can have high-seek and low-seek cows. In a particular paper, they call them a go-getter or a laid-back. So they put GPS units on these cattle, and some would go out and graze all kinds of pasture. Others would lay around the water hole. That's a high-seek. You know, some people are a high-seek. And these are some of the interesting things that are being learned, and it doesn't really matter what the species is. I think some of these are basic principles, and even people, when you think about it, you know, have combinations of these traits. The big difference with people is that, you know, they get sad, they might write a beautiful sonnet. The dog's going to whine when he's left home alone. This is the research by Gregory Burns. He's been putting dogs in the MRI scanner. It's a lot of fun to train dogs to lay still in the MRI scanner. And what they find is when they smell their favorite person, the reward center lights up, just like it does in a person. And do animals feel pain? One of the things about grazing animals is since they're a prey species animal, horses and cattle both, they tend to cover up pain. Now you have some problem with your horse, you've always got to rule out that pain is an issue. Yes, animals do feel pain, absolutely. And what do dogs need? We have bred a dog to be a super social animal. That's the difference between a dog and the wolf. You know, we've changed them, and they need people to play with them every single day. That's what dogs need. We've bred them that way. Okay, does the pressure ramp work? Thunder shirts? Yep, that does. That's an idea that actually came from me because when I got into puberty, I started having terrible anxiety attacks, and I found that if I watched cattle go in the squeeze chute, they tended to kind of relax, so I built the squeeze chute contraption. You can read about that in Thinking in Pictures. That book is out there. And yes, do want to sell books. Okay. Now the thing is, a brain can either be more thinking or a brain can be more social. This is true in animals, and it's true in people. You see, autism in the extreme mild forms is just personality variation. You can be yak more social, or maybe you were the cave person that invented the first stone spear. In other words, more problem solving. Then in the more severe forms, yes, you've got a very, very severe handicap. And I was reading the Western magazines that were up in the room. This is a very interesting hotel. And I got to thinking that some of those cowboys that did all those things back then, they probably were a little bit on the spectrum, or maybe ADHD. I've had some people with autism tell me they think they were born in the wrong century. So here's a paper that shows that the more thinking or more social is on a continuum with animals. Go look this one up on Google Scholar. Solitary mammals provide an animal model for autism. Look that up. If you just 3 keywords, solitary mammals, autism, 3 keywords, you will find this paper. I found another mind blower of a paper. It was called Genomic Trade-Offs, or Autism and Schizophrenia, the Steep Price for Human Brain. You can't get rid of it. It's part of just normal variations, what they call polygenic. You can't get rid of it. There isn't going to be a cure for it. Because in the milder forms, that's why you got this microphone, we got these fancy computer monitors. Who do you think made that? The autistic brain. You see, people who think verbally are very top-down, so they get all hung up on, oh, today's fad training method. Educators do exactly the same thing. Oh, there's only one way to teach the kid. I'm a bottom-up thinker, and my mind makes categories. Dogs do the same thing. Horses do the same thing. For example, in service dogs, you need to teach it certain behaviors when the vest is on, and then you can play when the vest is off. The animal will make categories. When I'm in the pickup, I guard the pickup. Outside the pickup, I can go and play. Yeah, interesting things here. We've bred dogs to be super, super social. Well, how do you know the amygdala is a fear center? Well, here are old experiments that I dug out of the literature, experiments you can't do today because they're very, very invasive. But they show very clearly you stimulate the amygdala. That'll be talked about later today. You get great, big, massive fear reactions. Now, the thing is that an animal can either approach something or avoid something. There's a really cool video online. Look up remote-controlled car and cattle. on YouTube, remote-controlled car and cattle. And when you first put that out in the field, they all run away from it. But then they start to chase it. It's like crazy. And then when it sits still, they will approach it, but then when it moves slightly, they jump away. It will oscillate back and forth between fear and seek. I call it curiously afraid. Now, if they get really freaked out, that's not going to work. But just a little bit mild, there's a system in the brain, the switch has actually been discovered, that will switch back between fear and seek. I did a little experiment with cattle where I just put a clipboard with paper on it in the middle of the feed yard, and the cattle would come up and touch it. Then the wind would flap the paper, and they'd back up and move away, and then they'd come back again. Yeah, and if you take the amygdala out of a monkey, then it loses all its fear. Rats no longer fearing cats, they aren't going to live very long. Now, the basic principle in this slide is that when you force an animal to do something, you get a lot more fear stress. You're just forcing animals. And when animals voluntarily cooperate with anything you do, veterinary procedures or whatever, they're going to be, they're not going to get all that fear stress. And there's trained antelope. I worked with the Denver Zoo. We did this 20 years ago. We worked on training animals that they didn't think you could train. Now, the thing you had to be very careful with these antelopes is super flighty. So we had to make sure we didn't push them past the orienting response. And to teach that animal to tolerate a sliding door opening, the first day it was moved this much. And then they oriented. That's all we did that day. Because if you pushed it past the orienting stage, he would have splatted against the wall. Pigs and cattle are easier to move if people work with them. Another thing that we need to be doing in the whole industry is horsemanship and stockmanship matter. And in a lot of places don't get enough pay, but being a very good horse person or a very good cattle person is something that is highly skilled and requires a lot of work to do it. Now, first trip on the truck was a lot more stressful than subsequent trips. We got to make sure that an animal's first experience with something new is a good first experience. That could be a person, horse trailer, or a place. Because if first experiences are really, really super bad, it's hard for animals to get over it. I think some of these rescue horses have like a PTSD flashbacks. We'll be talking a little bit more about a horse that I've met. Fear. It's a proper scientific word. You know, they used to, 25 years ago, I'd send in a journal article about cattle temperament, and they forced me to use the word agitation. That's why I've got papers that say that, because the reviewers wouldn't let me use the word fear. Fear is a proper scientific word. Absolutely, absolutely. And fearful animals are less productive animals. Now, animal memories are specific because it's a picture. A man on a horse is a different picture than a man on the ground. And one of the problems we've had with cattle is if they've only been handled on the horse, they meet their first man on the ground, their flight zone's really huge. And horses will do the same thing. When I was in high school, and I didn't know the things I know now, we had a horse named Goldie. And she was fine for horseshoeing, veterinary, put the tack on, but as soon as you got on her back, she went completely crazy. And she was a beautiful horse that had been traumatized by some previous owner with some horrible bit that cut her tongue. So the bad things had happened on her back. On the back was bad, on the ground was okay. Now, another example of being very specific, I went to a program where prisoners were training Mustangs. And during the roundups, the cowboys wore Western clothes. Well, the guards at this prison also wore Western clothes. So the Mustangs were scared of the guards, but they weren't scared of the prisoners because they didn't wear Western clothes. You see, that is something that's specific. And when I said to the guards, you are the bad guys, and I pointed at the prisoners, you're the good guys, they didn't particularly like it, but that's the way the horses perceived it. The horses perceived it that way. Now, there is one really good piece of research with horses, the Learner and Fent paper in 2011. When you habituate an animal to a blue and white umbrella of suddenly opening, that doesn't transfer to a tarp. Think about it. An umbrella looks totally different than a tarp. Now, if you took one of these umbrellas that a photographer uses, yeah, that's enough the same, that the horse would probably react to the same way. Animal thinking is specific because it's sensory-based. I want you to think about it. It's a picture. It's a sound. There was an elephant at a zoo where diesel-powered equipment was scary because somebody probably pushed him around with something that ran with a diesel. Gas-powered equipment was good. So the diesel sound was scary and the gas-powered sound was a good sound. It's sensory-based. You can get touch sensations. I've had 4 or 5 different people tell me that when they took a certain bit out of a horse's mouth, it fixed it. Again, a horse, they didn't really know much about it. But I looked up online and I found these horrible twisted wired snaffle bits that would cut up a horse's mouth. Well, if somebody's abused it with that, then all the snaffle jointed bits are in the bad category. And if the bit is one piece with no moving parts, it's a different feeling picture. And you're like, open a new file folder in the animal's brain. So sometimes you can figure out something they're afraid of and get rid of it. See, and you can get rid of the bit. But there's other things out in the environment, like maybe umbrellas, I can't totally get rid of them. But I was talking to a lady who was a very verbal thinker just the other night. I said, you need to go out to a tack room where there's a lot of different tack, and I want you to sit down with your eyes closed, and we're going to put jointed bits in one hand, a whole bunch of different ones sequentially, and then one-piece bits in the other man, and want you to think about how the horse can make a category where jointeds are bad and something solid one piece, so that never hurts you. You see, this is, since the memories are specific, you can sometimes get the animal to open a new file folder. You got horses that buck when you change gaits. Think about it. The saddle feels totally different at a walk, trot, and a canter. It's a different feeling sensation. And when I was in high school, I had a horse that did that my aunt had bought for me, a beautiful horse named Sizzler. You go from a trot to canter, Sizzy would buck me off. And I didn't know the things I know now. You know what I would have done now? I had a complete English outfit. I would have just switched him over to English, and I would have put some really weird pad on him to give him a different feeling picture. And then I would have started working with him very slowly, change gaits, one tail switch, we stop. And you know what? He probably would have been fixed. But I didn't know the things that I know now about how specific they are and how they think. Well, as a person with autism, I see movies in my head. That's how I think, in photorealistic pictures. And there's actual evidence now that some people think completely in pictures. Now, there's more mathematical people that think in patterns. They're going to be your computer programmers. They think patterns and music, not pictures. And then you get your word thinkers. And word thinkers tend to overgeneralize and get too much of getting on a big fad. All I'm going to say right now about clicker training is let's really try this on these rescues and these abused kind of, PTSD type of horses. Okay, an animal's first experience with something new needs to be a good first experience. We got to prevent the formation of these bad fear memories. Now, here's a horse that had been adopted from the Bureau of Land Management, and the handling history was known. And during a veterinary procedure, they'd thrown alcohol in his eyes. We know exactly who did it. It was a little short guy with a black cowboy hat. This horse became terrified of black hats. White hat was fine. Black cowboy hats were scary. Now, when I put the black hat on the ground, it was less scary. But then as I moved the hat closer and closer and closer to my head, it got more and more scary. Now, I can't get rid of every black hat. This is a real problem. I'm kicking myself that I didn't take this big black purse I had in my car. I think if I put that on my head, it would have done the same thing. But an object that's very similar in shape can cause a problem. The other thing that can cause a problem is an object in a new place. My student, Morgan's got one of those big round hat boxes for a cowboy hat, big metal thing. And her horse was used to her carrying it around, setting it on the ground. Then one day she put the hat box on the picnic table and her horse went berserk. It somehow made it different because the thinking specific. Or maybe men's with beards are bad. They'll tune into something on a person like the Western clothing versus the non-Western clothing. Maybe ladies with long hair are bad. A horse will also be less fearful of something if he's with a familiar person. That can help to damp down some of the fear responses. There's a dog. We talked already about categories. When I'm in the truck, I protect it, and when I'm outside the truck, I can go play. Man on the horse, man on the ground. That's 2 different file folders, the horse's head. It's sensory-based, not word-based. And the prey species animal runs away, rapid movement, the dog tends to chase it. Now, the thing is, really slow movement, like this camera that was being used at the HBO movie, you could put that around the heads of cattle and they didn't do anything. It was like really weird. And we got to get people seeing things out in the environment. You wouldn't want to be galloping a horse down this road and then he stops and you get dumped over this white lid. You know, it's something that sort of shouldn't be there. Now, if you're driving the cattle down that road, they stop, give them a chance to put the head down. Or I talk a lot to veterinarians and veterinary techs. So you bring a horse into the clinic, it's scared of the drain, give him a chance to put his head down and take a look at the drain. And then he'll probably walk over it. Chains hanging down in chutes. I still have to talk about this stuff because people aren't seeing it. I guess that gives me job security. I still am going to places and having to fix things like, well, they sprayed water on the entrance to the chute. And then you wonder why the cattle won't go in. I just had to fix that one this summer. All right, let's see how good you are at visual thinking. Yeah, I really want to emphasize non-slip flooring, that's super important. But how many people here, raise your hand, noticed that that animal was looking at the sunbeam? Now, we're doing medium well. I'll tell you who's got you beat. Elementary school kids, not kidding, zookeepers. The zookeepers, I showed the same exact slide, did a better job on this than you guys did. But elementary school kids were the best. Let me tell you, there's a lot of dyslexics and ADHD and mild autism among the zookeepers. Okay, I show this picture to veterinary students. Very few of them notice that the dog's in a brace position. That's not good for the dog. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of making sure you don't trigger the fear of falling. And where do you get extreme fear behavior? Maybe an animal spooking at a hot air balloon, or horse sees flags for the first time. I talked to a rancher who had worked really, really hard on really good low-stress cattle handling. You know, cattle kind of a flighty temperament, everything's calm and nice. I said, yes, but if something truly novel happens, like a hot air balloon landing on your ranch, your cattle are going to take off. And he admitted that that happened because that was something they weren't trained to. New, novel things. Strong stressor if you shove it in the face, attractive if they're allowed to approach. Now, there are the cattle coming right up to the clipboard, and when the wind flipped the paper, they ran away. And here's the research where I talked about you can have this curiously afraid behavior. You can go into the seek mode or a little bit of the fear mode, and you can see that on that video of the remote-controlled car and the cattle. Okay, I always get asked about slaughtering. They behave the same way in both places. Okay, and a lot of the problems you have with the slaughter plant is just novelty. Just like the thoroughbred racehorses, the novelty of the loudspeakers. They were pooping cow pies, winning their head off when a strange person holds your lead. Now here's a trained cattle that they had for the movie, and they wanted me to take a PR picture with her. So I kneel down, she's getting ready to lick me, and she's about jumping on top of me. Well, she hadn't been trained with reflector boards. Reflector boards are panels, just styrofoam panels, either white or silver, and they'd taken a 4x8 reflector board, size of a sheet of plywood, and they'd gone like that. Now, they assumed that since she was fine with white box trucks, she'd be fine with a piece of white reflector board. No, box trucks don't go and move like that. They tell you they're coming. They move in a much more controlled way. They have a motor, they have a sound. And then I told them not to remove the reflector board. They did it again, and she's rising up, and I'm getting a stereoscopic view of her underside coming over the top of me. And by that time, I was swearing. But this is just an example of how specific they can be. And here's bulls living among the whirligigs. What's novel for one animal is just old home for another animal. You know, it's what your experience is. And when I got out of the car, they took off. That was novel. And there was a pig there chewing a plastic booty. That's an example of approaching something novel. And then if in the Philippines, the cattle get exposed to so much novelty, nothing scares them. Here's the interesting research that was done with wolves. A lot of the problems with stressed cattle and wolves, it's learned. And so you have barking German shepherds and wolf urine smells, and the cows who have been attacked by wolves, they get really stressed out. And there's an animal that somebody ruined by just tying it up to a post and letting it fight it out. Yeah, we've got to get away from that kind of a rough training methods where you just tie it up to a post, let it fight it out. Because this animal never habituated. And little foals, there's some of this, what they were imprinting they were doing, way too rough. No, that's not the thing to do. No, you just stroke the mare, and she's, it's all used to that, and the next thing you know, you're stroking the baby. And I read a great paper in Applied Animal Behavior Science. People go like this on their horse. Horses hate that. First of all, you should stroke an animal, don't pat it. No, scratch it on the withers right there. There's a brand new paper, and it showed that scratching on the withers is a lot more effective than just hitting them. Now, we've been doing 20 years temperament selection in cattle, so we don't have so many that just come out the top of the chute like that. I want to finish up a little warning about genetics. You over-select for any trait, you will wreck your animal, period. I don't care if it's a performance trait, an appearance trait, or a production trait in a farm animal. I want to show you the Bellier foxes. Okay, fur fox, lean and lanky, bite your hand off. And for 20 generations, Bellier selected for tame fox. And he ended up with a heavy-bodied border collie fox. Like wow, isn't that trippy? You wouldn't think you'd change the coloration, just selecting for temperament and change the body shape. Then they overdid selecting for temperament and they got epilepsy. And there's guide dogs that are blind right now that are getting epilepsy at age 4 because they're selecting for extreme calmness. I think they're also selecting all the brains out of them too. I talked to somebody the other day that got a guide dog puppy that washed out of the program because it's too stupid and they couldn't train it. This is an example of over-selecting. Deer for the last 30 years have been farmed. 30 years ago when I went to New Zealand, there's no way you could have got in a pen with a deer like this. There's no way. No, they've changed over the 30 years. You over-select for any single trait, you're going to end up with problems. I'm concerned in farm animals with problems with disease resistance. We were selecting cattle just for carcass traits. We're getting leg conformation issues. Not good. Laying hens, they just selected for laying eggs, and you ended up with a frazzled, nervous wreck that beat her feathers off. Now, problems like this happen slowly. I call it bad becoming normal. This has happened with lameness in dairy cattle. Slowly got worse, and people didn't realize it was slowly getting worse. You can look at the layer there and the broiler, they're like different species. There's a pig with really hideous leg conformation. And there's a steer at the state fair with really awful looking legs. Then I've heard about people breeding quarter horses for small hooves or some other stupid thing. Be careful, because you'll wreck your animal. Crooked claw in cattle is a defect. That paint's pretty. Every 30 seconds he jumped, and he would have been labeled Tourette's if he was a person. And there's a pig where they just bred pigs for leanness. This is about 25 years ago. They just bred pigs for leanness. They ended up with aggressive, nasty pigs that fought and did things like chew the ears off, really bad. That's going overboard on giant butts on cattle. And all the animals have to have their babies by cesarean. Oh, it's terrible. And right now, the bulldog, I think, is a really terrible mess. It can't walk, it can't breathe, and it can't have its babies naturally. And there's a really cute picture you can find online of a French bulldog with an airline oxygen mask on. It got bred so much for the smashed-in nose that it couldn't tolerate a plane's pressurization altitude. It's only slightly higher than here. It's lower than Vail. And you're breeding a dog that can't breathe at 7,500 feet. That's what a plane is pressurized to. That's disgusting. This is an example of bad becoming normal. Well, there's a crazy pig there with a gigantic butt. And here's where they just bred for repro and nothing else, so she's got a whole bunch of scrawny little piglets. You see, I'm showing you extreme stuff. But we got to make sure we don't slide into bad becoming normal. I'm appalled at the extreme Arabian horse, where they are disgusting. You go on Google Images, type in extreme Arabian horse. I show that to people and they're horrified. How do you get into a mess with that? It happens slowly. I call it bad becoming normal. Also, there's genomic trade-offs. You breed the sheep to have twin lambs, she's got lower immune response. She has one lamb, she's got more ability to fight off disease. There's always trade-offs. People have a hard time getting that. There's another weird pig. All right, now we're going to end up trashing a bulldog because I think it's a prime example of genetics just gone too far. And you get to that. And that's what the bulldog looked like back in 1938. No, we've really gotten into some problems. And there is the extreme Arabian. Yeah, disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. This is what I call bad becoming normal. So we go, okay, dish face is pretty. So then you just keep selecting for more and more of a dish face until you get something that's really hideous. And it happens slowly and people don't see it. I'm going to give you an example of a kind of lighting that we use in big factories. They're called a sodium light. I'm glad we're rid of them, going to LEDs. The thing I hated about these lights is that when you first put them in, they're nice and bright. 5, 6 years later, you lost half your light. And it changed so slowly that nobody noticed it. Well, this is the way that some of these genetic problems can kind of creep up on you. Then, of course, I got to show my books off right there. And I'll be around till after lunch. And hopefully we got time for some questions.